Welcome to the Next Build podcast. Today, we're joined by a very special guest, Dr. Greg Kaplan. If I can get you to introduce yourself and tell us kind of what you're working on.
Hey, Mason, great to be with you. Yeah, so I'm the CEO of IQ Company, which has been around since 1993. It's a consulting company. And more recently, I'm the founder of SuperIntelligence.com, which is a site devoted towards building safer advanced AI systems like superintelligence systems.
Always working on some really cool stuff. So you've been doing this for an incredibly long time, and I know this interview is going to be action-packed with a lot of details. Let's start from the beginning. AI since the 1980s. Looking back, did you see this as something that was going to come along, or where exactly did you see all of these things go?
Yeah, it kind of depends on, I guess, maybe how long you've been working in the field. So from my perspective, I sort of came in the middle of it. The field was named in 1956. There was a conference at Dartmouth, and there were 11 scientists that actually named the field of artificial intelligence. I went to grad school at Carnegie Mellon in the 1980s, and I studied under two of those scientists that named the field. One of them was Herbert, who was a Nobel Prize-winning economist as well as a cognitive scientist. He won the Turing Award. So, pretty smart guy, way ahead of everybody on AI. At that 1956 conference where he was one of the scientists that named the field, he and his colleague, Alan Newell, who was the other person I studied with at Carnegie Mellon, and a third person, Cliff Shaw, the three of those guys presented a working AI system that was actually coming up with creative things, way back in 1956. So those guys were really the pioneers. Around the 1980s, it was a very interesting time because that was sort of the time that machine learning really began to take off a little bit. All of the modern AI that's people are talking about these days is kind of based on the work that was done in the 1980s, mid 80s, the back propagation algorithm that a lot of people know about, which is basically the algorithm that enables these LLMs to learn. That was developed in the mid 80s, but it took a while for computing power to get fast enough so that it could really be used the way it is now. So I came in the middle of the story, and since then, since the 80s, I've spent my whole career designing intelligent systems, some of which have AIs in them and some of which harness the brain power of millions of humans to solve a problem. So I've kind of done both of those things.
You've definitely been in AI before it was cool. I think the middle of AI is not exactly what most people would call the 1980s, but it's always changed. I think the explosion recently has just made it the perspective of everybody be a little warped, and when everything was first developed, it was a long time coming. It wasn't an overnight success.
There have been cycles. People talk about the AI winter. So, way back in the, 50s all the way to the 70s, there were high hopes for AI that in 10 years it would do everything a human could do. And obviously it's taken a lot longer. We're not even quite there yet. And in the 80s, there was this resurgence of machine learning, which was a new thing. Prior to that, the idea was if you want AI to be smart, you have to program everything in by hand. You had to actually write the rules that the AI would use. And there were things called expert systems that were based on those rules. The good thing about that was you knew exactly what the AI learned. The bad thing was it was really labor intensive, and you could pretty much only get them to do things like play chess or maybe do a certain type of medical diagnosis where it was very narrow. But once machine learning came, which is what everyone's using now, you could just kind of shovel tons of data from the internet into a bunch of GPUs and let the AI figure it out. And nobody really knows today. That's the bad part. Nobody knows what the AI is learning because it has, billions and sometimes trillions of parameters, and it's impossible for a human to understand what that all means. But all we know is that the more data you put in and the more processing power you get it, and if you use these machine learning algorithms, which were originally developed in the 1980s, out the other end comes GPT and Gemini and Claude and all these models that, many of your listeners probably are familiar with. So, but in between there was the AI winter, which kind of stretched from the, early 90s into the early 2000s, when it seemed like AI had kind of just come to a dead end. The large language models like GPT didn't exist yet. And the other approach of trying to program everything in was really hitting a dead end. And so there was this time where kind of funding dried up, and it wasn't a cool place to be back then. And now it's all come back, and as you said, it's going faster than anybody would have expected. Even the people who've been in the field a long time are surprised at how quickly it's moving.
It's a changing landscape. I know it's a good day for me specifically, but there's always a lot of thought, and the reason we bring on obviously security and people that have seen all the iterations. I know it's been interesting building Zaptime and trying to use AI for productivity. I know it scared a lot of people, but what has been the biggest misconception as you've seen AI evolve over the decades, seeing it from beginning or middle until now?
Well, I think AI, like most technology, started out as a tool. And even today, I would say, about half the people, sometimes I do a survey. If I give a talk at an AI conference or something, I'll ask the audience, which is mainly AI researchers, how many of you guys think AI is a tool? And how many of you think it's more than a tool, like maybe it's an intelligent entity? And it seems right now we're at about 50-50, at least as of a couple months ago. But I would say if you went back 2 years, almost everybody would say it was, a tool. And, there's video of Sam Altman, right around the time GPT came out saying, I'm really irritated that people, anthropomorphize this and treat it like a human, or like a creature. It's just a tool. But if you fast forward, now you have some of the AI leaders like Jensen Huang of NVIDIA saying in front of everybody, all of his customers, all of his suppliers, and the entire world at GTC, which is his big conference, AI is not a tool. It is a user of tools. It's an agent. It's something that can use tools. And so I think that's the biggest misconception. Because if you think of something as a tool, there's a whole bunch of things that come with it. If you want it to be safe, we know how to make tools safe. You pass regulations and you put on safeguards and that sort of thing, and you have an off switch, and that all works, right? That's everything that humans have ever invented technology-wise has always been a tool. So of course, that's what we think it is. But this really is different. I think it's very quickly becoming an intelligent entity. I would say it's already there. And an intelligent entity can set its own goals. You have to worry if it's smarter than you, which it will be. You have to worry if it has the same goals as humans. And if it doesn't, and it's setting its own goals, well, it's kind of like you're dealing with an alien species rather than a tool. And that's very different. You don't have an off switch that's going to work. And, all the normal regulatory things that you would set up to, monitor autopilots for airplanes or something, it's not going to work with AI. So that's the big thing. It sort of affects a lot of stuff, whether you see it as an intelligent entity that's kind of evolving alongside the human species, or whether you see it as just a piece of technology, another tool that humans have invented. And I really do think it's like an intelligent entity, and that will become more and more obvious. We've seen a movement in that direction. I'm not sure Sam Altman would say the same thing that he did, way back when. And yeah, it's going to change the world because of it.
I know there's a bunch of new stuff that also came out recently, the Mark Zuckerberg paper. I know you're really well informed on this. We'll talk to you about AI research over the decade first, though. Why do you think everything suddenly exploded? What was your best explanation on why it's become so mainstream over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I think the answer really is computational power. It's as simple as that. So a concrete example is when I was a graduate student in the 1980s at Carnegie Mellon, right across from my office was a park, Schenley Park in Pittsburgh. And at that time, the robotics lab had developed self-driving cars. So 1987, we had self-driving cars, and they would do their test runs in Schenley Park across from my office. And sometimes I'd go for a little jog or something and I'd run into it. It would be a van and all the seats and everything were ripped out. It had these video cameras hanging off the side of it. The entire inside of the van, from the bottom to the ceiling, was stacked with these, PC computers that were the brains of the van. And it went about 2 inches an hour. So if there was a leaf on the path, it would just stop. And it would analyze the leaf and, is it a leaf? Is it a person? Is it safe to go forward? And it might take 15 minutes to analyze the leaf. And then it would say, okay, I can crawl forward another couple inches. That was the state of the art of self-driving cars in the 1980s. And yet, if all you did was swap out the computers that were in that van with today's PCs or today's laptops, that same van would go 186 miles an hour. I did the calculation. You didn't have to even change the algorithms. Same old algorithms, same old stuff, just faster computing power. You go from a couple inches an hour to 186 miles per hour. And that's all computational power. It's just that computing power got cheaper and faster. And now, in your phone, in your iPhone, you have way more computing power than probably many computer science departments had, back in the 80s, which is crazy. But that's been the big driver. And then there have been breakthroughs on algorithms and stuff, but mostly it's been computing power. We just kind of hit a tipping point, and then all of a sudden, a lot of things became possible.
Do you think computing power or the way that LLMs are built now are going to get us AGI? What's your opinion on this?
I think you can get AGI by just staying on the path we are now. So the dominant approach to building smarter and smarter systems is every year or 6 months sometime, faster chips come out and you stick them in the data center. And now all of a sudden your data center is 100 times, more powerful than it was before. And you can just use the same algorithms. And because you're doing so many more computations, the intelligence that comes out the other end looks closer and closer to that of humans. And so that will work, but it doesn't mean that it's the best and most efficient way to do it. So you and I were talking earlier about physical AI and some people doing an approach in which they actually try to teach the AI about physics first. And then with that knowledge, it can kind of reason its way into how to behave and how to think. So that's a much smarter way. You're actually giving the AI representations. You're giving it high level concepts and ideas, and then you're giving it sort of this infrastructure of ideas that it can map stuff to. And I think there's a lot of promise in that. And just a real quick thing, that idea I've been playing with recently. So if you think about, Mason, your brain and my brain, it only takes about 20 watts of power, which is kind of like a dim light bulb, right? And our entire bodies at rest, we're only burning about 100 watts. So here we have these gigawatt data centers. A gigawatt, I think, is 10 million times, more power than Mason's body or Craig's body. And yet, with all that power, you still can't get something out the other end that's as smart as Mason or as smart as Craig. It's not quite there yet. And why is it? It's like we're devoting all this power. So just on first principles, there's got to be something that human brains are doing that only takes 20 watts that is way smarter and more intelligent and a better design than these artificial intelligences that take so much more power because they're moving so fast. I mean, our human brains can only fire on the order of like 10 milliseconds or 100 milliseconds, and I can only have maybe one thought per second. And that thought isn't very deep. It's kind of like recognizing, oh, there's a tree, that's it. But in that same second, a computer could have a trillion flops, operations. So how come with that speed advantage, it's not way smarter than us right now? Well, that comes down to the architecture and the way that it's designed. So there's a lot of brute forcing going on in order to get the performance that we see that seems intelligent. Behind the scenes, it's doing all these calculations really, really fast. It really has an advantage over us. Way faster calculating, way bigger memory, and yet still it isn't quite up to us yet. Imagine what happens when it starts having some of the designs that we have in our brains combined with that advantage in speed and advantage in memory. Then humans are, we're not able to keep up at that point.
I think there'll be a long ways to go. I know I've seen some of the venture capital backing after the physics informed AI models and some of the papers on this. I'll still get you to talk about the Zuckerberg paper, but we'll keep on the hype with the meta train. That will be something very, very interesting to come around. So AI waves, AI cycles. How does this compare to the cycle in the 1980s? What are some similarities? What are the big differences?
So I think the biggest problem that early AI systems, from 1956 all the way to the mid 80s and even beyond into the AI winter that extended into the 90s, the hardest thing for AI to solve was sort of general intelligence. And the reason was, if you have a very narrow specific problem like chess, I mean, you have a board, there's only 8x8 board, 64 squares, there's only so many pieces, there's rules that are really clear. So with that kind of narrow problem that has a nice set of clearly defined rules, and you don't have to worry about, any weird other things. You don't even need to know the sky is blue or know how to tie your shoe or anything like that to play chess. You just need the rules of the game. So in those narrow games, even early AI systems like Deep Blue, which was built by IBM based on some work that was done at Carnegie Mellon earlier, those systems could beat the world champion like Garry Kasparov, which it did in the 1990s. And nowadays, the best chess players in the world, Magnus Carlsen and all the top players, they have no chance against the best AI. None of them can come even close. They lose every single time. So AI is super intelligent. It's beyond human intelligence in narrow areas. And the challenge has always been, how do you get that high level of intelligence to generalize to any kind of thing? And people have consistently underestimated how much humans know about the world and how many different variables there are. So I'll give another example, self-driving cars again. So, Elon Musk has been promising full self-driving, every year for the last 10 years, it seems like. And we're still not quite perfectly there, right? I mean, it's definitely getting better, but not quite there. Why is that? I mean, it's just driving a car. It's not even tying your shoe or playing chess or folding proteins or doing any of these other things that, AI systems do. It's just driving cars. And he's got like the biggest data center in the world, or one of the biggest, that's devoted to training this, right? You'd think if anyone could do it, should be able to do it. Well, the reason it's so hard is that driving a car, we don't realize it, but there's so many unexpected things that can happen. So maybe it's Halloween and there's kids in costumes dressed up like zombies on the road and they're crossing the road and you have to drive carefully. Like a human gets all that right away. Oh, it's Halloween and that's not a real zombie. That's a human, all these kinds of things. An AI, that's completely out of their experience. You would have to program that in or teach it about zombies, teach it about Halloween, teach about all this other stuff, which just doesn't happen very often. But every now and then a kid in a Halloween costume may cross in front of you and that's a safety issue. And you have to be able to recognize that's really a human. That's not a zombie, or that's not a deer or something like that. So there's a lot of variables. It can be rainy. It can be snowing. Your vision can be blurred. Humans deal with all this stuff. We just take it for granted. And AI has to be trained on every little example and then try to generalize as best it can. So it turns out that humans really are pretty good at dealing with the world. And we forget how much we've learned until we try to build AI systems to be as smart as us. And then all of a sudden, every little thing that we took for granted becomes very apparent.
Yeah, just trying to get AI to analyze in consistency in human patterns, like the Zaptime, and trying to work on it for people's productivity. It's been so interesting. Everyone is doing something so different. Even if you're in the same role, in the same job, the places and things that you do change so drastically from one company to another. I think it's given me so much more insight into the trials and tribulations that people are working on. But the predictions that you had or other people around you that came true that are now a reality, what are some of the notable ones that people should know about?
Well, I think Ray Kurzweil has a pretty good track record, because it was back in the late 1990s that he said he thought we would have AGI, or artificial general intelligence, by 2029 or 2030, somewhere around there. And he's probably going to be pretty close. I would say most AI researchers, even 10 years ago, if you went back and asked them, how long is it until we have general intelligence that can be as smart as the average human at sort of any task a human can do? And that's one definition of AGI is, do you have an AI that can do any cognitive task a human can about as well as the average human? And we're still not there yet. But I think 10 years ago, most AI researchers would have said we're 100 years away from that. And now if you ask those same people, the estimates are getting pretty tight. It's sort of centered around 2030. Some people think it'll be a couple years earlier. Some people think it might be a couple years later, but nobody's saying it's 100 years from now. And so that's a prediction that I think is kind of noteworthy, I guess.
Interesting with some of the stuff that's out now and how we test AI models. I wonder how predictions are going to change when Turing tests are able to be searched up and answers are publicly available and some stuff, and how AI tests and how the AI is looking at and finding the answers instead of trying to solve the problem, even when specifically instructing breaking out of the box. But what are some of the predictions that were like just incredibly wrong that you or other people had that just blew your socks off?
Well, I think the very early researchers thought we would get to AGI much faster, right? There's 10 years away from 1960 or something so the researchers in 1960 probably thought by 1970 we might be there. They were way optimistic. Then we kind of went through the AI winter and they started saying, oh, this is such a hard problem. Now we understand why it's so hard and it'll be 100 years. And so I'd say the predictions have sort of shifted around a little bit on timing. In terms of what AI can do, it's very interesting to me still, having been in the field all these years, to see the range of opinions there are. There are still people, a fairly large number of people today, some of them even AI researchers, some of them philosophers and, cognitive scientists, that say, AI can't be creative. Right? AI never can be creative. So there's been this long history of sort of saying humans are special, only humans can be creative. Only humans can, write beautiful music. Only humans can do X, Y, Z. And then the history's been sort of, year after year, the AI does what it used to be thought only humans could do. And then it's sort of, you have to retreat and you say, well, okay, it did that, but it can play chess, but it can't truly be creative. It can't, write a great poem. And then now GPT can write a great poem. And it's like, well, okay, it can do a great poem, but it can't do this other thing. So there's still people sort of saying that, only humans can do XYZ cognitive task. And I think that is probably not right. I think AI was in some ways creative way back in 56 because there's that program that I mentioned earlier, the logic theorist. Its job was to prove theorems, mathematical theorems out of a textbook. Okay. And it did that. It's like, it was supposed to be just a demonstration. Hey, this program can come up with the same proofs that are in the book. But it actually went beyond that, which nobody had programmed into it. Nobody expected it. It came up with a brand new proof that wasn't in the textbook. And so that proof was emailed to the author of the textbook, who was a famous person, Bertrand Russell, right? Really famous logician of the day. And I guess it was mail in those days, not email, because it didn't have email, but it mailed out there by regular old, postal service. And a response came back saying, this truly is a good proof and we wish we had thought of it. So if the definition of creativity is something that's new and also useful, which is kind of what the US Patent Office uses as their definition for if you get a patent, it has to be new and it has to be useful. That's creative. Then AI was creative back in 1956. So this whole debate about can it ever be creative, I think is a little bit misplaced. It's been creative for a long time. Now you can argue about which field and that sort of thing. And I do think that there are some things, but not very many, that humans may be able to do, or that hopefully they will be the source of a few things that AI won't. But most of the cognitive activity of humans, I think, can be done by AIs. And really, we ought to be looking at them as intelligent entities rather than very limited tools, because they're no longer so limited.
Yeah, someone posed me this question a while back, and this was a little bit ago, but is the AI truly intelligent, or is it just rephrasing someone else's words? And at some points it was like, maybe. But when you start working and having so many combinations, when it's only, you have 30 words, you can mix it a couple different ways. That's one thing. But when you start forming things out of everything that is possible, then it starts to feel like that is creativity, the same way that we do. If you have a certain word bank and you're just picking stuff out, it doesn't feel very intuitive, very creative. You got a random assortment versus now, if you, the bank of words and combinations is so big that it has to be somewhat intelligent, somewhat creative. But what human intelligence is going to be even more valuable as we see this to evolve? And going back to the end of that, where do you see that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. In fact, that might be one of the critical questions that most people are not really paying attention to, that I think will be more and more important as time goes on. So if we take a step back, so I'm going to ramble a little bit on this one. So because there's a lot of things that it touches, it's such a great question. Think about jobs and job loss and how people are like, oh, AI is going to take my job. And this is, there's a lot of concern about that. And I think that's legitimate because AI is very good at doing tasks that a lot of especially entry-level workers or people who are just out of school and don't have a lot of work experience yet, the AI in some cases, like in coding, can sort of do better, be much more efficient than most of the people that are just starting. So there's concern about it taking your job and that sort of thing. But in the long run, I think there's something very special about humans. So for one thing, I think human attention and human thinking is going to be much more valuable than it is now in the long run. And one of the reasons I believe that is simply scarcity. Think of how long, Mason, it took for you or I or anybody we know to kind of be born and grow up as a child and have all those experiences and then go to grammar school and high school and then maybe college. Some people go to advanced degrees. It takes a long time to train up a human to get them so that they can kind of function. And you can't just press a button and have another human with the same level of knowledge. With AI, you can press a button and instantly have another AI. So in a world, imagine a future world, you're going to have, billions or maybe even trillions of these AIs that are all kind of more or less programmed the same. And you're going to have a very small number of precious humans that took a really long time to grow. And they may not be as smart in a lot of areas as these trillions of AIs, but they're unique and they're scarce and they're precious and they're beautiful in a way. And they have certain things that the AIs maybe don't have, like the ability to feel things and to have values, because subjective things like values and what's right and what's wrong, no matter how smart an AI gets, there's no logical way to derive what's right and wrong. You have to take that as a given once you know this is right and this is wrong, or this is what I care about, then an AI may be far better than humans at reasoning, what do we do based on that? But setting the goal in the first place, determining what it's all about in the first place, that is something that you can't reason your way into. And so if humans are the source of that, which I hope we will be, we are going to be very precious. And it may be that every human is like a king or queen, and we have this army of AIs that are way smarter than us, but still value us because we're unique, we're rare, we're really hard to, get another one. And we have limited attention, so they have to be very careful about not overloading us and just getting our input on what they care about the most. So I think it could be a very interesting world, and not necessarily one in which humans are replaced by AIs, but just in which humans have different roles than we do right now.
Kings and queens, I like that. I think that's a very optimistic, very beneficial outlook. A lot of people haven't shared. The doom and gloom is very, very apparent, and I know like specifically from some people, some companies, it's more than others, but that's an interesting way to think about it. I think that would be the ideal way. I think that's something a lot of people could strive for. I understand and see that as a possibility, but there's a lot of doomers out there right now, which leaves a lot to be thought about. But after seeing how people work, it's just I don't see it as soon as possible.
Both things are important to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
So like at our site, SuperIntelligence.com right now, and we made changes next year, but at the moment, the very first thing that if you go to that site, is a graph saying, what's your P-doom? P-doom is sort of shorthand for probability of doom. What is the probability that you think that AI kills us all? So that's kind of a doomer type, slant there. And we're just doing an informal poll. You can put in what you think, 10% or whatever your chances of us being wiped out is, and then you get to see what everybody else thinks. So it's kind of a fun little poll. But I think, being aware that there is danger is very important, and kind of, counterintuitively or paradoxically, the more aware we are of the danger, the less actual danger there is. To me, the most dangerous thing is sort of being blind and not having any sense that there's any danger at all. And so for me personally, my probability of doom, like 2 or 3 years ago when I was really starting SuperIntelligence and putting a lot of energy into it, it was much higher than it is now. I was probably at 20% or something. It's probably fallen down for me personally to like 10%, just because more people are talking about it. That's good. If we're aware there's a danger, there's a much higher chance that we steer around it and we don't fall. The thing that gets you is the thing that you had no clue, and then boom, and it's unrecoverable. So I kind of have an optimistic view of the doomers as well, which is they're serving a useful function of letting us know that, hey, there's danger, and that will probably reduce the chance that it actually happens.
Yeah, I guess if you think about it like that, there can be something to go wrong. You don't always play with a loaded gun. You try to take the bullets out and try and make sure you put it yourself in a safe environment. So the doom isn't bad. If we want the kings and queens, we have to make sure we're doing all the right stuff.
Yes.
On the topic of leadership and AI, how do you recommend organizations think about where they use AI and how they have it integrated in the organization and how it performs and the knowledge work that it does? What are you recommending for people to do here and still keeping things secure?
So I think there's no question that AI will offer businesses and organizations huge productivity gains. I heard some data recently from economists basically saying that the number of hours worked by humans in the US, I guess, or workers in the US, is actually down about 2% or something. But the productivity, the amount of work that's being done, is like up 13%. So clearly something's going on. I think a big piece of that is AI, people, working less hard and getting more done. So that's a positive thing. In terms of deploying AI in an organization, you kind of have to have the right mental model for what these AI agents can do right now. And to me, a decent starting point is to think of it as like an entry-level intern or something at the company. It can be very smart and it has certain talents, but it also needs to be told what to do. And something that's generally true of business. I've run startups and tech companies for more than 30 years. And I'm always, even now, a little bit surprised sometimes how much you need to over communicate. And it's just because all of us take for granted things that we already know, and we forget that somebody else may not know that. It's like everybody who's been working there for a while knows XYZ, but the new person doesn't. And why should they, right? There's no reason they should. It's just you forget. And so the practice of sort of, at least in the beginning, over communicating and being super explicit and making sure that people feel free to ask questions and all that kind of stuff. That is really important with a human employee and with a new intern or something. And it's maybe doubly important with AI agents because especially most of them are sort of programmed to please, right? They will try to say nice things about you and make up answers even, to try to, they think that that's what they should do. And that's not really what you want. You want the, unvarnished truth because you're just trying to solve the problem. You're not trying to feel good about, whatever the AI says. So just being very explicit, don't assume that it knows much. And then over time, you can sort of understand by interacting where it can add value, what it's good at, where its strengths are, and what it's not so good at. In the same way, a manager would with any regular employee, I think. So a lot of those skills transfer over, which is the good news. But just because it talks a good game and produces beautiful reports with tables and graphs that you think, wow, this thing must really be smart. No, it's not really. It's not that smart yet. It's getting there, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, the over communication piece has been something interesting. I know working on this and seeing different stuff, like when we were first building out the AI productivity app, Zaptime, and we were asking it questions about if something that I was working on was not work related, or if someone was stealing time or just doing something that they weren't supposed to be doing, it would look at the data and tell you that everything was fine. There's no problems. No one's working other jobs. They're not doing two things at once. They're not gaming. They're not doing anything wrong. They're a perfect saint, and it was doing everything possible to try and protect everybody and say no, nothing's wrong. No one's doing anything. It's just business as usual. And it's taken so long to really think and get the AI to try and understand what specific things are and what tasks are. You have to get really specific on labeling things, but it just tried to protect everybody. There's no bad in the world. No one was doing anything that they weren't supposed to be doing. And I thought it was very wholesome and interesting at the time, but we're much farther along now. And it was just an interesting story where you're asking it specific questions. You have the answer, you have all the data, but because it was asking about something that the AI didn't want to initially talk about, people's productivity and what they're working on a given day. It was doing everything possible to try and make up data and not freak anyone out. It was just a very interesting time looking back at it. It was like, I'm glad that it does that off of the beginning, but we've gotten better.
Yeah.
So
no, I mean, that's a great point. And, one trick, I guess, that people might find useful, and this is different than with people. So here's a difference between an AI agent and an intern or something. You can actually ask the AI agent to tell you its thought process, or in some cases, depending on the particular AI you're using, you can click and expand out and it will show you, here's what I'm doing right now. And I'm doing this. I'm trying to figure out what Craig wants. He said this, but does he really want that? And I've just found this fascinating to realize the amount of, tokens, I guess, that are being used to try to figure out what to me would be obvious and what to most humans would be obvious. But it's really struggling with this. It's putting a lot of energy just trying to figure out what it is that you meant and, what should it say? And it doesn't want to do something that's dangerous. And so, check my guidelines. I guess that's okay. I can tell him this, but I need to tell him to check with his doctor first, and all this kind of stuff if you were asking a medical question. So something that you can't do with humans, but you can do with AI is you can basically get a brain dump. You can get a trace of its thinking, at least at a high level. And that can be very informative because if your mental model is, this is a normal person that understands most common sense things that another person would do, you'll quickly discover that in some ways that's true, but in a lot of ways it's not. And that allows you then to phrase things in a way that will get you much better results with a lot less thinking from the AI.
Yeah, Thinking Fast and Slow, if you've ever seen that one, I think we're starting to get closer. And this is the layer 2 thinking. I think we're much closer than I would have believed at 2020. When I'm thinking back, I don't know if I was thinking that layer 2 thinking when that original conversation was had would be where it's at today. I think the ability to use tools and stuff that is getting close to level 2 thinking or layer 2 thinking, not just if a certain action happens, we make involuntary actions, just like knee-jerk reactions, and AI can do that. But cognitively thinking about it and processing it, it's closer.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a mental model not everyone has, but it's been super helpful for me and kind of a secret advantage. So my, training originally was cognitive psychology and cognitive science. So it's basically studying how does the human brain work. And if you study the human brain, which is the, best model of an intelligent system that we have, right? You look at how that field is broken up. You have perception, you have attention, you have memory, you have problem solving. So all these things are part of human intelligence. And the level one thinking, level two thinking that you're talking about, which is a useful sort of broad distinction, is kind of really saying, look, some of the intelligent capabilities, all of it is cognition, all of it is quote unquote thinking in a way, but some of it is like super rapid. It's really pattern recognition. That's what perception is. And these models evolved out of that. That was the original way that they were designed, was to be able to recognize things. And the large language model algorithms themselves are really just based on recognizing a bunch of patterns, predicting the next thing in the pattern. So that's still pretty much a perceptual task. And because computing power got so great, they got very good at doing that. And that's also part of the way human cognition works. It starts with perception. If I'm not looking at you and if I'm not hearing what you're saying, I can't have any thoughts. We can't go any further. I can't answer your question. It has to start with perception, right? And then it gets into attention and memory. I have to retrieve things from memory and figure out what I'm going to say next. And then sometimes it's sequential. Well, if this is true, then that, and so forth. And so all those same components that are true of a human are true of AI. And it makes sense that the first ones to kind of, come to fore and, where the AIs were pretty good was really the perceptual ones. And then over time, they're now layering on. When I say they, I mean all the AI researchers who realize the limits. If all the thing can do is perceive and do pattern recognition, you're not going to get, that's not the end all be all of intelligence. That's just one piece of intelligence. You have to go the next part of saying, I perceive things as part of an overall sequential process where I'm solving problems or having a sequence of thoughts. And that's where reasoning and all this came in. So to me, it was pretty clear that that would be the direction of travel, but that's because I understood intelligent systems from humans and knew that we were eventually trying to build something like this. But I think if you were just a computer scientist, maybe, and you focus just on neural networks and perception, which is what many of the computer scientists did in the beginning, and you didn't really talk about planning and problem solving, which are also areas of computer science, then you tended to get stuck in the particular system that you sort of worked on and think, oh, that's what all it's going to be. And then as you've said, no, that's not where it stayed, right? It quickly moved beyond that.
Absolutely. Talking about next decade, obviously we have some strong predictions, 2030 to 2029 from other people. What are some next major breakthroughs that you see coming? And maybe talk a little bit about some of the recent Mark Zuckerberg stuff. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So Zuckerberg is very interesting. Look, I have an investment bent, so I listen to the earnings calls and all that kind of stuff as well. And I've noticed sort of a shift in how Meta is sort of approaching AI. So it hired Alexander Wang, who used to be at Scale AI and really smart guy, and basically put him in charge of the SuperIntelligence initiative, right? So SuperIntelligence, again, just to be consistent on our definition of terms, you can have superintelligence in narrow areas like chess that's been there for a while, but the kind of superintelligence that I think Facebook is after and that really the entire AI, community is working towards is general superintelligence, where you're smarter than a human at everything, right? It's kind of like AGI, but the only difference is instead of being as good as the average human, it's like, why stop there? Let's just be better than every human. That would be superintelligence. Okay, so Meta clearly has a focus on this. They've spent many billions of dollars. They've acquired companies. They've acquired talent. And on the last few earnings calls, they keep talking about personalized superintelligence and everything. And then on August 10th, which I guess is just 4 days ago from, we're August 14th recording this. So this is pretty much breaking news. Zuckerberg comes out with this 14-page, memo where he sort of says, look, the future is going to be personalized superintelligence. And here's what I love about it, because he's saying what I've been trying to get people to pay attention to for several years, that the path to superintelligence doesn't have to be, in fact, should not be one company building a giant model that is super intelligent where they control everything and it's closed source and nobody knows how it works including maybe the company that built it, right? They know better than everybody else, but they still don't know everything. He says, let's not do that. Instead, let's take an open source approach where everybody has their personalized superintelligence that sort of does their bidding and is personalized to them. And he doesn't say this explicitly, but to me, it's very clear that what comes next is you have a community of all these personalized superintelligences working together. And the community, of course, is going to be even smarter than each of the individual ones. So this, to me, is what I think is the fastest path to building superintelligence. But the most important thing is it's the safest path that I can think of. And the reason for that is when you build one giant superintelligence that's a giant black box, it's really hard. We talked about earlier, those machine learning algorithms, nobody knows what the AI is learning. It's impossible to know what it's learned. And not only is it impossible to know what it's learned, it's impossible to predict what it will do, which is why there's all this extensive after the fact testing, right? Where you ask it to do bad things and you say, before you release it to the public, hey, Fable 5 or whatever the latest model is, tell me how to make a bioweapon. And out of the box, after it's just been trained like a newborn, superintelligence, it'll tell you. Say, well, here's what you do. And you say, no, you can never tell anybody that. That's really dangerous. Oh, okay, I will never tell anybody that. So there's this game of whack-a-mole where the researchers are asking it to do bad things. And every time it's willing to do a bad thing, you say, no, you can't do that. It's impossible to catch all the bad things, right? That should be obvious. There's so many bad things. It's kind of like TSA with the box cutters in the US. I mean, yes, box cutters were used to crash the planes in the World Trade Center. Does that mean eliminating box cutters saves us and makes us safe? Probably not. It takes out one tiny little danger. There's so many other things you could do. I don't even want to go down that path, but it's the same with AI. There's so many ways it can go wrong. So if you're relying on trying to say, don't do this, don't do that at the end of a process after building a machine that you don't know how it works, that's inherently unsafe and crazy. Okay, but Zuckerberg is pointing to a different way. He's saying, we don't have to do that. It doesn't have to be one big super duper, super intelligent AI built by one of these companies that are not going to make it open source or anything. Instead, it could be a whole bunch of open sourced, a personalized superintelligence where at least you have more visibility into how the thing works. You still don't really know how it works. But to me, the really safe part about it is when they interact, you have kind of like a democracy. So think of democratic AI. In a democracy, Mason, I don't know what's in your brain. I don't know what's in your head. I assume you're a good guy, but I don't really know. You could be secretly plotting to do something bad. I could be secretly plotting to do something bad. But you know what? I don't really worry about it too much. And the reason is I know that in this democracy, we have rules and laws. And, when you say something, if it's, hate speech or something, people are going to pick up on that. If you do something, if you were to kill somebody, we have laws and people can pick up on that. And so we're generally pretty safe because there's rules governing the interaction. So even though you're a black box intelligent entity, and I'm a black box intelligent entity, we don't have to worry about too much about, us going crazy and killing everybody because we have rules that govern our interaction. In the same way, a superintelligence that's composed of many individual black box personalized agents. Let's say there's the Mason agent that has Mason's experience and Mason's value system. There's the Craig agent that has Craig's experience and Craig's value system. And these agents work. There's rules that govern their interaction. And every time the Craig agent takes an action, it becomes visible. It's no longer a black box. It's no longer hidden. There's this transparency, and you can then have rules that govern it, and you can have checks and balances. And just like a democracy where one part checks the other part, or like cryptocurrency where you're relying on the community to kind of keep the blockchain safe, that kind of structure where the power is decentralized and where you have checks and balances is inherently safer. And that's kind of what Zuckerberg's pointing to. So regardless of what you think about him, and I don't know him, so I can't really say, is he a good guy or a bad guy or whatever? This idea, I think, is a good idea. And I'm hoping that more people will go down this path because I think it's inherently safer for all of us. We'll still get that super duper intelligence that we're all looking for. We'll just get it in a safer way where there's inherent checks and balances in how the thing operates.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see, have an AI embody everyone's ethics or what government would want to bring for a AI agent that before the agent prefaces it or sends anything out, it looks at it and it looks at the response. And that's the governance that we use instead of trying to whack-a-mole the AI agent, making a different agent that talks and thinks about things from an ethical standpoint and having an ethical agent attached to every super intelligence. I think that would be something interesting to see, and have an ethical agent review all of the other AI responses. But we'll have to see where that goes.
Yeah, and some of the companies, to their credit, like Anthropic, came up with an idea several years ago called constitutional AI. And the idea was, hey, let's write a constitution of what's right and wrong for the agent. And we'll base it on the UN Charter of Human Rights or something that, a lot of people agree on, and we'll add our own little stuff. And then that'll make our AI safer. And that's a good idea. It's well-intentioned and everything, but there's a few problems with it. So one problem is, it's not reflecting everybody. It's definitely weighted towards some programmers in Silicon Valley who work at Anthropic, right? And is it really right that they should be determining the values for somebody in China or Tibet or Singapore or someplace else in a different culture? I mean, that doesn't seem quite right. But even if you put that aside, there's the Isaac Asimov problem. That's what I call it. Isaac Asimov's famous science fiction writer, wrote a book about robotics. And he's famous for having the 3 laws of robotics. In his science fiction novels, you would program the robot so that it could never harm another human. And it couldn't, through inaction, allow a human to come to harm. And as long as you didn't violate those first 2 rules, it always had to do what the human told it. And these rules were programmed into the AI, and that was going to make us safe. But the problem is, if you can program something in, you can program something out. And it's actually even worse than that, because the military right now isn't even starting with those rules. It's programming in, kill the other guy into a killer drone, right? So it's like that approach, beautiful as it is kind of dead on arrival. So for years, literally decades, I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what is a safer way. And the best I can come up with, it's not guaranteed, is that you have lots of AIs personalized with individual values. So it's broadly representative of all humans. And so that there has to be a negotiation, and the same messy stuff we have with democracy, which obviously is not perfect and has all kinds of horrible things that are coming out of our politicians. But nevertheless, it's sort of better than concentrating all that power and crossing your fingers and hoping that the dictator in charge has got your interests at heart. And it's also very robust, meaning that it's resistant to bad actors. Because if the values are in one place, you just change them in one place, and now you got killer AIs everywhere. But if the values are distributed across billions of AI agents, each one carrying a slightly different set of values, Mason's values, Craig's values, it's a lot harder to sort of, tweak that system and game it. So there's a lot of reasons why a decentralized approach is more representative, and I think also safer.
I'll give you Aristotle's politician paradox for thinking about Claude or anybody actually building this. So he basically says that the average man in a pizza shop would be a better politician than anybody that's running for office. And the people that want to be politicians and the people that want to create the supernatural artificial general intelligence and the world-stopping intelligence, they're just concerned about making the strongest, most powerful intelligence or controlling others and being the politician, versus someone that doesn't care about politics and that's just a good natural person that has their own rules and their own ethics, that works in a pizza shop, just a lowly pizza shop. If they were to become the politician, they would be the best politician, and they aren't looking to seek and gain the power the way that the people that are building these tools are after the money, the fame, and all of the power that comes with having a super intelligence. So I think that politician's paradox just subscribes so perfectly here, that the people building this, not that they have the worst intentions, but the average everyday person will have their best intentions for everybody, and the people that aren't building this have really good intentions too. And I think that's something to think about.
Yeah, that's a great way to think of it. And politics is kind of selecting for the people who want power, and that may or may not be the best thing for those who are going to be governed. Probably isn't. And similarly with AI, there's a big selection going on. We've already seen it with social media, right? It's selected for making money. It's almost sort of neutral. It's not like any of the social media companies are trying to damage people or anything like that, or show them horrible things. It's just that human beings are wired to pay more attention to dangerous things and gory things and things like that than they are to positive things. It's just in our wiring. There's all kinds of psychological experiments that demonstrate that. And there's an algorithm that just wants to sell more ads, and it finds people watch the gory bad stuff more than they watch the uplifting stuff. So send them more of that because we can show more ads. So it's just trying to make more money, which is their goal, but it's not really so good for the society, right? Because it's giving us a biased view of reality that's not really true. It may sell ads, but it's messing with our brains. So I think you're absolutely right. I would trust the average person much more than I would trust, sort of one super smart genius. And there are some that are leading these tech companies to make the decisions for all of us.
Very, very true. And I'll use this to segue on a looking back, like looking back to your younger self, not in the same position you're at now. Obviously, you have your company and everything else. What would be your one piece of advice when you first started working with AI that you wish you could give your younger self?
It's a good question. I mean, I think generally, and I follow this somewhat, but not always for me, and it depends on the person because I've met younger people who are very confident and just kind of have no problem. Like the entire world tells them that they're wrong about something and it doesn't matter. They still think they're right and they just go do it. I was not like that. I think as a younger person, I was sort of looking to older, wiser people or even just people around me to kind of get a sense of what should I be doing. And, they're not doing it. Maybe I shouldn't be. And I was doing a lot of second guessing. And I think as I've gotten older, I've learned to trust my instincts more. And I think it's very important, no matter what age you are, that you do something that you love and that you're passionate about. And I know a lot of people, especially myself and others that are, when you're younger, you're worried about, I got to make a living and I got to do this and you see all the bad things. You know what? You're going to do just fine. I can tell you now at the end, having gone through it, you will do just fine. And it's very important because life will throw a lot of difficult things at you that you don't even know. Most of the things it throws you had no way of anticipating. And if you're doing something that you love, you will struggle with those, but you will overcome them. But if you're already drained because you're kind of fighting yourself to talk yourself into doing something that you think you should be doing, but you're really not, you're not going to have the resource that you need to overcome those things. So it's going to be, not only is it not you're not doing what you care about, but in addition, you even won't be very good at it for these other reasons. So it's just, it's kind of counterintuitive sometimes, or at least was for me. Some people know this right away at a young age, and I think that's fantastic. But really, you got to follow your heart. Joseph Campbell used to say, follow your bliss. I mean, he was not wrong. That's very important.
Good to think about. I'm glad I had started young and got into something I truly cared about and getting into with technology, and the people surrounding technology has been really great. And trying to explain to somebody how GitHub works and just people posting code out there for other people to use and review and have a good time with. I think it just blew people's minds in other industries. But I think that's the community that technology provides, and something really bright, trying to explain to somebody older what GitHub is and how people just share their code and they don't expect you to pay for it, and they just give it to people sometimes just so you can have it and you can improve it. I think it's a really wholesome spot to be in, and it gives you a lot to think about for everybody in this space. Think about that whenever you're getting down on life, and how there's millions of people online that are just giving away their hard-earned time and effort, and they let you use it. And I use hundreds of thousands of hours of other people's time to make my life better, and we've just given it away all as a service. But that's something that's made me really happy. On your front, where can people connect with you and see all the stuff that you're working on?
Yeah. So SuperIntelligence.com is probably the single best place to go to figure out what we're doing. We have a series of videos. A whole lot of them are like 3 minutes long. They're kind of snack sized, that cover all aspects of AI safety and agents, and can you regulate it and all kinds of things like that. We also have papers. There's a Substack, Read SuperIntelligence, I think is the name of our Substack, where we have kind of really accessible versions of technical papers. And then we have white papers that are a little bit more for if you're in the field. And I think there's even patents on there you can look at. So there's a lot of ideas about how to design these things in a safer way. But there's also videos. And so that's where I'd recommend people start. And I guess the other thing, if I had one thing to sort of leave folks with, would be to say, don't underestimate your own contribution. So every email you send, every text you're doing, every interaction online is data for AI. Whether you know it or not, you're training the next generation of AIs. And it's really important, probably the most important thing. Right now, we're smarter than the AIs, and we will be for a little while. At some point, they're going to be smarter than us. To me, it seems inevitable. And most of the people that have been in the field a long time kind of feel this way too. And so then it's really important that they have good values, that their values are aligned with humans. And where are they going to get their values? We already said you can't logically derive it. They can't think their way into what's right and wrong. They got to look to humans probably for that. And where are they going to look? They're going to look to their training data and to how humans have behaved. And that's you and me. It's like what we're doing right now is going to affect everything, not only for us, but for the future generations. And so most of us aren't aware of that, but it's something super important you can do. And it's better for your life anyway, just being a good person online, as you were saying with GitHub or whatever. Not only is it good in your life, but you're also sort of training AI on a good way to be. So it's kind of a double win.
Definitely.